The transport ship left him behind with nothing but a low hum in the sky. Ethan Cross stood on the barren ground watching as the vessel vanished into the clouds. He had expected to feel loneliness the moment he was alone, but instead, he felt a strange kind of freedom. This was what he wanted. No politics, no endless noise of crowded colonies, no voices telling him what he should or should not do. Before him stretched a land that seemed caught between two worlds. Sharp ridges of stone rose from the desert like the bones of giants, while deep valleys held patches of strange plants with glowing tips. The air was thin, cold, and dry, carrying with it a whisper that seemed to belong to an older age. Humanity had only recently learned to step between the stars, but this world felt as though it had been waiting for them long before. Ethan adjusted the strap of the pack on his shoulder and began to walk. His boots crunched against the dust and gravel, each step echoing faintly off the cliffs. The map he had bought back on the colony station showed ruins somewhere near this valley. A fortress left behind by an alien race no one truly understood. Traders spoke of it as a dead place, silent for centuries, too far from the main routes to be of any value. That was exactly why Ethan wanted it. The sun of this world was pale, dimmer than Earth's, and cast long shadows over the cracked ground. Ethan followed the shadows until he reached the mouth of a canyon. The cliffs leaned in like tall guardians, and at the end of the path stood the thing he had come for. The stronghold rose from the rock itself, as though the mountain had been shaped into walls and towers. Its surface was smooth, dark, and polished like glass but worn by time. Vines with silver leaves curled around broken gates. Strange markings, almost like letters, were etched into the stone, symbols of a civilization gone long before the first human had learned fire. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. For the first time since leaving Earth, he felt awe. He set up camp near the gates that night. His small shelter unfolded from a pack providing light and heat, yet his eyes kept drifting toward the dark entrance of the fortress. It was not just a ruin, it looked too intact for that. It waited in silence, watching him the way an empty stage watches an actor before the play begins. The wind howled outside, rattling against the cliffs, but the fortress stood still, unbroken. Ethan fell asleep with the sense that the world itself was listening. The next morning he stepped into the stronghold. The gates opened with little effort, groaning like a tired giant, and a corridor stretched before him. Dust rose at his steps, but the walls shone faintly under the beam of his light. They were covered in carvings, swirls, and spirals that reminded him of galaxies. The deeper he walked, the stranger the air felt. It was as if the fortress had its own breath, faint currents shifting around him. He found chambers with long stone tables as if once used for meetings or councils. He found balconies overlooking deep shafts of darkness, their depths invisible. Everywhere he went, he saw no sign of life, no bones, no remains, only emptiness. But the emptiness was not dead. When he touched one of the walls, the stone warmed beneath his hand. A faint hum traveled up his arm, quick as lightning but soft as a whisper. The wall glowed faintly where his fingers rested, then faded when he pulled away. His heart raced. It was impossible. This place had been abandoned for centuries, yet something still lived within it. He spent hours exploring. Every chamber seemed different. Some had statues of tall figures with elongated limbs, their faces hidden beneath smooth masks. Others had strange circles on the floor, as if they had been used for rituals or travel. In one great hall, the ceiling rose so high that his light could not touch it, and the echo of his footsteps sounded like a drum. Yet the strangest moment came when he reached a room that seemed to wait just for him. It was circular, with a single seat in the center, shaped like a throne but too wide and too alien for a human. The walls around it were covered in symbols, more complex than the others. Ethan stepped closer, and without warning, the room came alive. Light filled the symbols. The air trembled. A faint voice, not in words but in tones, rose like music. Ethan froze, every hair on his skin standing upright. He had triggered something, but what? He raised his hands, speaking out loud as if the fortress could understand him. "I mean no harm. I'm only here to live." The voice faded and the light dimmed, but not before one of the symbols glowed brighter than the rest. Ethan studied it carefully. It looked like a spiral with a star at the center, the same spiral he had seen carved outside. He touched it gently, and the walls answered. For a moment, the fortress itself seemed to see him. Days passed. Ethan moved his supplies inside, setting his shelter within one of the smaller chambers. Each morning he explored deeper, and each night he returned to study the glowing symbols. He began to feel a connection forming, not with stone or technology, but with something larger, an intelligence woven into the fortress itself. The place was not dead. It was asleep, waiting for someone to wake it. One evening, while cooking a simple meal, Ethan sat on the steps of the hall and looked out across the silent valley. The stars of this system burned brighter than he had ever seen. He thought about the stories humans told of themselves, that they were weak among the stars, small compared to the ancient powers of the galaxy. Looking at the stronghold behind him, he began to wonder if that was true. He whispered to himself, "Maybe we were meant to find this place." The wind answered with silence. But somewhere deep within the fortress, the hum grew louder, like a heartbeat awakening. By the end of his first week, Ethan no longer felt alone. He still had no neighbors, no colony nearby, no human voices to hear. Yet when he walked the halls, when he touched the walls, when he sat in the circular chamber, he felt as though something was listening, learning him. The stronghold was not just stone and metal. It was alive, and it had chosen him. The fortress had grown familiar to Ethan after days of living inside, yet every time he walked deeper into its endless halls, he felt the same sense of awe. It was not like walking in a ruin. It was like walking inside the memory of another world. Each wall carried shapes and symbols. Some looked like stars, others like rivers of light. He had begun sketching them in a small notebook. But the more he drew, the less he understood. The patterns were too complex, too deliberate. They felt less like art and more like instructions written in a language older than his species. One morning, he woke to find the symbols glowing faintly on their own. It was not the room he had touched earlier, but another corridor near the heart of the fortress. The glow was soft like moonlight, tracing the spirals on the wall. Curious, Ethan followed it. The corridor stretched into darkness, but the glowing lines lit his path. He walked slowly, half expecting the light to fade the moment he stepped forward. But instead it brightened with each step as if guiding him. At the end of the hall he discovered a chamber unlike the others. This one had walls that curved inward, forming a dome. In the center was a crystal column, tall and slender with faint light pulsing inside it. The moment he entered, the light quickened, glowing brighter. Ethan stood frozen. The air carried a low hum, the same sound he had felt on his first day here, but stronger now. It echoed not just in his ears, but in his chest like a second heartbeat. He whispered, "What are you?" The crystal shimmered, and then something happened that left him breathless. The walls came alive with light, forming shapes, holograms, though far more real than anything human technology had created. He saw tall beings, their forms graceful and strange, with elongated limbs and faces hidden behind smooth masks. They walked through the halls as though time itself had reversed, bringing the fortress back to life for just a moment. Ethan felt his skin prickle. He was watching the builders of this place. The images showed them standing around the crystal column, pressing their long hands against it. The light inside the column swelled and strange symbols filled the air, circling them like fireflies. Though he could not understand the language, the meaning pressed faintly into his mind. Something about memory, something about inheritance. Then, as quickly as they appeared, the figures faded, leaving only the silent column glowing faintly in the dark. Ethan approached slowly and reached out a hand. The crystal was cool to the touch, yet a spark traveled up his arm when he touched it. A ripple of energy that filled his head with whispers. He staggered back, clutching his forehead. Voices. Not clear, not human, but layered tones that rose and fell like music. They were not speaking words, at least not in any tongue he knew. But there was meaning in them, fragments, ideas, chosen. "Keeper, awaken." The whispers faded, leaving silence. Ethan gasped for air. His heart pounded as he looked at the crystal. For the first time, he felt a weight settle on his shoulders. This place was not just shelter. It was a vault of something greater, something that wanted him to listen. That evening, he could not sleep. He sat outside the fortress under the pale stars, staring into the dark horizon. His small campfire crackled weakly, barely holding back the chill of the night wind. He thought about the whispers. Were they real, or was his mind inventing them? He had heard stories of colonists who lost themselves on remote worlds, who began seeing shapes and shadows and hearing voices in the wind. Isolation could twist the mind. But deep down, Ethan knew this was not madness. The fortress had spoken. He remembered the tone of the voices, not cruel, not hostile, but patient, expectant, like a teacher waiting for a student to understand. As the fire dimmed, Ethan muttered to himself, "You want me to be something? But what?" The wind carried no answer, yet behind him, faint light pulsed from within the gates as if the fortress itself was listening. The next day, Ethan began exploring with new purpose. He followed the glow whenever it appeared, mapping the places that reacted to him. Sometimes the walls lit up faintly under his touch. Other times whole chambers came alive, showing him flashes of memory. Images of battles fought long ago, ships sailing through starlight, and beings who seemed both alien and strangely familiar. Each vision left him with questions. Who were these builders? Why had they abandoned this place? And why out of all the species in the galaxy did their fortress answer to him? On the 6th day he found something that made his breath catch. It was a hall filled with tall statues, each one holding a sphere of crystal in its hands. The statues faced inward, toward a circular platform at the center. When Ethan stepped onto the platform, the crystals flared with light, and the statues' eyes glowed faintly. This time, the vision was clearer. The builders stood in a circle, much like the statues, holding the same spheres. Above them, a great star map filled the air, thousands of points of light spreading into spirals. Ethan recognized some of the constellations, stars humanity had already charted, but others were unknown. The map was larger than anything humans had ever recorded. As the builders raised their spheres, the stars in the vision shifted, converging on a single world. Ethan's heart raced when he realized the world was the one he now stood on. The vision ended with the builders lowering their spheres and bowing their masked heads. Then everything faded back into silence. Ethan stepped off the platform, his legs trembling. They had built this place around this world for a reason, and somehow that reason was connected to him now. That night, sleep finally came, but it was filled with dreams. He saw the fortress alive with light, its walls singing with voices that shook the sky. He saw himself standing at its heart, commanding forces he did not understand. He saw enemies, shadows without faces, surrounding the stronghold, and himself standing alone, holding them back with nothing but the fortress at his side. He woke with sweat on his face and a single thought burning in his mind. This place is not just shelter. It's a weapon. Days became a blur. Ethan studied the carvings, traced the paths of the glowing halls, and tried to copy the symbols into his notebook. The whispers grew clearer each time, filling his head with fragments of meaning. He began to sense patterns in the voices, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be completed. One evening, as he sat in the throne-like chair in the circular chamber, the whispers returned stronger than ever. He closed his eyes and listened, letting the tones flow through him. For the first time, he understood a full sentence. "You are the keeper." Ethan's eyes snapped open. The room was glowing softly, the symbols pulsing like a heartbeat. His chest tightened. The fortress had chosen him, not by accident, not by chance, but by design. And though he did not yet know what it meant, he felt the weight of that choice settle deep into his soul. The fortress was no ruin. It was alive, and it wanted him to awaken it fully. The fortress had already given Ethan visions, whispers, and fragments of forgotten knowledge, but he still had no idea what it truly wanted from him. Each day he went deeper into its heart, guided by faint pulses of light and soft hums in the walls. The deeper he walked, the stronger the connection felt, as if invisible threads were pulling him towards something that had been waiting for centuries. One morning, he woke to find the glow stronger than ever. The entire main corridor shimmered faintly, leading him like a river of stars. Ethan packed a few supplies, slung his pack over his shoulder, and followed. His boots echoed against the smooth floor, and the air grew warmer the farther he went. The corridor ended in a chamber he had never seen before. It was enormous, a cathedral carved into the mountain itself. Tall pillars stretched into the ceiling, where beams of light shone down from cracks that seemed too perfect to be natural. At the very center of the chamber stood a great sphere of glass and metal, humming softly. Ethan's heart raced. He had seen fragments of this in visions before, the builders standing around a glowing core. Now he was standing before it himself. The sphere pulsed with a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Strange conduits connected it to the walls and floor, and faint streams of light flowed through them. It was not dead. It was waiting. Ethan whispered, "The core of Dominion." He didn't know why those words came to him, but they felt right, as if the whispers had placed them in his mind. He stepped closer. The air thickened, warm against his skin, buzzing faintly in his ears. The closer he came, the louder the hum grew until it filled his entire body. He reached out a trembling hand, hesitant yet compelled. The moment his fingers brushed the surface of the core, the chamber exploded with light. Ethan staggered back, shielding his eyes, but the glow was everywhere inside him, around him, through him. The hum grew into a roar, and then into silence so deep it shook his bones. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the chamber. He stood in a vast field of stars. Around him floated fragments of memory, glimpses of alien battles, ships cutting through space like blades of light, and towering figures commanding forces he could not comprehend. Each fragment swirled around him before vanishing, leaving only starlight. Then a presence spoke. Not with words, but with meaning pressed directly into his mind. "You have been chosen." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Chosen for what?" "To bear what we could no longer hold. To guard what we could no longer guard." The stars shifted, forming the shape of the fortress. Its walls shone like silver, and at its heart glowed the same core he had touched. "This is our gift, our burden, our hope. You will carry it." Before Ethan could respond, light engulfed him. It poured into his veins, his bones, his very breath. He gasped as warmth spread through his body, not painful but overwhelming. His vision blurred. He felt his strength rising, his senses sharpening. His heartbeat thundered, but instead of fear, he felt power rushing through him like a river. Then everything went dark. When he awoke, he was lying on the chamber floor. The core still glowed faintly, calm once more. Ethan sat up, gasping for breath. His entire body tingled as though every nerve had been lit with fire. But it wasn't pain, it was energy. He lifted a hand and light flickered across his palm, thin streams of blue and silver dancing like sparks. Shocked, he pulled his hand back, but the sparks faded into his skin. What did you do to me?" he whispered. The core pulsed once, faint and slow, almost like an answer. Ethan stumbled to his feet. He felt different. His limbs lighter, his breath deeper, his mind sharper. Sounds echoed more clearly in his ears. The faint shifting of air in the corridors, the distant creak of stone. His eyes picked up details he would have missed before, like tiny carvings in the pillars and faint streams of energy flowing through the conduits. He was no longer just human. The next days were filled with discovery. At first, Ethan was afraid of the changes. When he touched the walls, they lit instantly, reacting not just faintly but fully, like living skin sensing its master. Doors opened at his approach. Machinery that had been silent for centuries roared to life. He found drones shaped like metallic insects crawling out of hidden vaults, responding to his thoughts as though he commanded them by instinct. The fortress no longer saw him as a guest. It saw him as its master. At night, he dreamed of the builders. He saw them using the same power, lifting objects with a wave of their hands, commanding machines with nothing but thought. But always in those dreams, he also saw shadows pressing against them, faceless enemies with endless numbers. And always, he saw the builders fall. Ethan woke each time with sweat on his skin and the same question in his mind. Why me? He was no soldier, no leader. He was just a man who wanted to escape his past and live quietly. Yet the fortress had chosen him, binding him to its core, filling him with its ancient strength. The first time he tested his strength was unintentional. He was moving crates of supplies near his shelter, crates he normally struggled to drag across the floor. On instinct, he lifted one with a single hand. It felt as light as air. Stunned, he placed it down gently, then tried another. The same. Later, when exploring a collapsed section of hallway, he managed to push aside a massive slab of stone that would have crushed him before. His body did not tire as quickly. His reflexes were sharper, his mind quicker. Even his sense of direction improved, as though the fortress itself whispered paths into his thoughts. He was stronger, faster, smarter. And yet, he knew this was only the beginning. One evening, Ethan stood in the great hall before the crystal column. The whispers returned, stronger this time. "You are bound," the voices said. "To what?" Ethan asked aloud. "To us. To all who came before. You are the keeper of the core. Its power is yours and your life is its life. As long as you live, it will live. As long as it lives, you will endure." Ethan's breath caught. That explained why he felt so different. He was linked to the fortress itself. He was not just using its power. He was part of it. He looked up at the glowing core. "And what if I refuse this? What if I walk away?" The whispers grew heavy, almost sorrowful. "There is no away. The bond is sealed. You are its heart now, and it is yours." Ethan fell silent. He wanted to feel anger, fear, maybe even regret. But instead what he felt was responsibility. The fortress had waited centuries for someone to carry its burden. And now that someone was him. He clenched his fists, watching sparks of light ripple faintly across his skin. He was no longer alone. He was no longer weak. The fortress had made him invincible. But in the silence that followed, Ethan also realized a truth that chilled him. If this power existed, others would come for it. And when they did, it would not just be his survival at stake. It would be humanity's place in the galaxy. The whispers faded, leaving him alone in the chamber. Ethan closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He had wanted nothing but a quiet life, but the fortress had given him something else, something he could not ignore. He was no longer just Ethan Cross, a wanderer looking for peace. He was the keeper of an ancient power, and the galaxy would soon learn it. Ethan had begun to understand the fortress, but understanding did not mean he was ready. The core of dominion pulsed faintly beneath his chest, a constant reminder of the power he now bore. For days he trained himself quietly, moving through the halls, learning the fortress's hidden systems, speaking to the whispers that guided him. Yet a nagging thought never left his mind. He was not alone in the galaxy. Rumors of a human living in an alien stronghold had already begun to spread. Traders, explorers, and some of humanity's rivals whispered of a man who had discovered ancient alien power. But it was not humans who first acted. One evening, while Ethan was tracing a corridor near the fortress's outer wall, the sky suddenly lit with movement. Dozens of ships descended from orbit, sleek, black, and armed with weapons that hummed faintly even from this distance. Ethan's heart clenched. These were invaders, strangers from far beyond, likely drawn by rumors of the fortress's secrets. And they had not come to negotiate. He ran back into the heart of the fortress. The core pulsed stronger than ever, almost alive under his skin. The hum in the walls grew loud, vibrating through the floors, echoing into every room. It was as though the fortress itself was waking, preparing for something it had waited centuries to face. Ethan reached the command hall, a circular chamber surrounded by consoles and strange machinery. The drones he had discovered earlier began moving instinctively, their metal limbs skittering across floors, walls, and ceilings. His connection with the fortress allowed him to guide them without speaking, without even thinking hard, like reaching into an invisible web and pulling at its threads. The first of the invaders landed on the barren ground outside. They moved quickly, unloading armored units and strange machines with blades and glowing energy. They did not advance slowly. They advanced with purpose, as if they expected the fortress to fight back and were confident it would fail. Ethan raised his hands, focusing on the walls, the floors, the gates. The fortress responded instantly. Metal shutters slid open from hidden panels, revealing weapons long dormant. Turrets once silent now hummed with energy. The ground shook as the fortress activated defensive shields, creating barriers that glowed faintly with blue light. The first wave of attackers was met with beams of energy that lanced from the walls, striking the ground around them. Drones surged forward, moving in patterns Ethan barely controlled, cutting off access points, blocking corridors, and herding enemy units into traps he could not have planned on his own. Yet the invaders adapted quickly. They moved with surprising coordination, deploying machines that could bypass turrets using devices that jammed the fortress's sensors. Ethan realized that raw power alone would not win this fight. He needed strategy. He closed his eyes, feeling the fortress around him. He could hear it breathe, its heartbeat syncing with his own. The whispers rose in his mind, suggesting paths, pointing out weaknesses, offering tactics he could implement with instinct. He realized the true advantage was not the weapons, it was the bond. Ethan moved from one control station to another, guiding energy flows, opening hidden passages, and activating defenses in unpredictable patterns. The invaders were powerful, but they were not bonded to the fortress. They could anticipate attacks, but they could not feel the structure's will. Hours passed. Ethan barely noticed the sun or what passed for night. He moved constantly, commanding drones, turrets, and traps with a speed and precision that surprised even him. Each attack wave was met with counters that seemed almost prescient, as if the fortress itself knew the invaders' plans before they acted. Despite the chaos, Ethan kept noticing small things that worried him. The invaders were learning, adjusting their tactics, probing for weaknesses. One wrong move could overwhelm the fortress, no matter how powerful he had become. Then, as the battle reached its peak, a massive machine emerged from the dust, a towering behemoth of metal and energy, bristling with weapons. Ethan felt a shiver of fear. Even with the fortress at his side, this was unlike anything he had faced. The machine advanced slowly, destroying barriers and turrets with terrifying ease. He realized he needed to act directly. Placing both hands on the core, he let his mind reach out, pulling energy from the fortress into his body. Sparks of power danced along his skin as he felt strength surge through every muscle. The core responded to his will, enhancing his reflexes, amplifying his speed and heightening his perception. Ethan stepped out into the great hall as the machine broke through the outer gate. He moved faster than the eye could follow, dodging energy blasts and countering with precise strikes. Drones surged around him, forming a living shield and then striking in waves, coordinated perfectly with his own movements. The invaders' eyes widened as they realized the man they had expected to be weak was controlling the fortress itself, moving like one entity with its power. Each time they thought they had an opening, the fortress shifted, closing off corridors, opening new paths, and striking where it was least expected. Still, the behemoth advanced relentlessly. It was the culmination of the invaders' planning, their ultimate weapon against him. Ethan felt the fortress thrumming beneath his feet, urging him to act. He focused, channeling the core's energy into his hands. When he struck the machine, the energy cascaded outward like a wave, destabilizing its circuits and sending it crashing to the ground. The battle did not end there. Smaller units swarmed, but they were disoriented, reacting too slowly. Ethan guided the fortress with increasing precision, pushing the invaders back step by step until the remaining units retreated. Finally, silence returned. Dust settled and the fortress breathed again, calm but alive. Ethan sank to the floor, exhausted but exhilarated. He had fought entire fleets alone and survived, but victory carried a weight. The invaders had been only the first. He could feel it in the whispers, a warning that others would come, drawn by the power he now held. The fortress had given him strength, but the galaxy would test him again. Ethan stood, brushing dust from his shoulders, and looked around the hall. Turrets hummed softly, drones returned to their resting positions, and the core glowed steadily beneath his chest. He realized that he had changed. He was no longer simply defending the fortress. He was part of it. Its heartbeat was his heartbeat, its awareness his awareness. The whispers rose again, calmer this time, like a teacher praising a student for the first lesson learned. You have done well. You are stronger than any single threat. But the trials are only beginning. Ethan nodded, understanding the truth in the words. He had survived the first assault, but the galaxy would not forget. Word would spread of a human wielding alien power. A human who had turned an ancient fortress into a weapon. And soon, others, stronger, smarter, more relentless, would arrive. He turned toward the central chamber, where the core pulsed with steady light. Placing a hand on it, he whispered, "I am ready." The fortress responded immediately, channels of energy flowing around him, humming in harmony with his own heartbeat. He felt its strength, its awareness, and its memory. He was no longer alone in this battle. Outside, the sky darkened with approaching ships. Ethan did not flinch. He had learned the first lesson. Power alone does not make one invincible, but the bond between human courage and alien wisdom does. And with that bond, he was prepared to face anything the galaxy could send. The first wave had been defeated, but the war was only beginning. The aftermath of the battle left the fortress alive but tense. Ethan Cross moved slowly through the halls, his mind still humming with the rhythm of the core. The fortress had survived, yes, but the skies beyond were quiet only for now. He could feel it. Others were coming. Beings who would test the limits of his strength, the fortress's power, and his ability to wield them wisely. But for the first time, he felt confidence. Not arrogance, confidence. He had survived when most would have fallen. He had faced overwhelming fleets, machines of impossible strength, and he had endured. The fortress, once a silent relic, now pulsed in harmony with him, ready to defend, ready to act, ready to teach. Ethan walked through the central chamber, where the core of Dominion glowed steadily. He placed a hand on its surface, feeling the flow of energy coursing through him, and listened to the whispers. They spoke of the builders, of their hopes, their failures, their knowledge. And they spoke of humanity, not as weak intruders into the galaxy, but as beings capable of courage, wisdom, and resilience. "You have learned," the whispers said, "but the galaxy will continue to test you. You are more than human, yet still human. That is your strength." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the statement. His mind had expanded, his senses heightened, but he had not lost himself. He still felt fear, joy, curiosity, and hope, the things that made him human. And it was those very qualities, the whispers reminded him, that allowed the fortress to function at its peak. Over the next few weeks, Ethan worked tirelessly. The fortress had many hidden chambers, each containing remnants of the builder's technology, defense systems, energy conduits, machines designed for tasks humanity could barely comprehend. He learned to activate them, to control them, and most importantly, to integrate them with the core. The drones moved with precision, responding not just to thought, but to instinct. Walls shifted, corridors reconfigured, and secret passages opened as needed. The fortress was a living machine, and Ethan had become its heart. Yet he did not forget the lessons of the first battle. Power alone would not win wars. Strategy, creativity, and understanding were just as important. He devised training exercises, running simulations in the halls of the fortress, predicting attack patterns, and learning to react faster than any enemy could anticipate. And he learned to wield the core in ways beyond mere strength. He discovered that he could manipulate energy flows, creating barriers, repairing damage, and even projecting illusions to mislead intruders. He could feel the fortress's will guiding him, suggesting actions that were precise, effective, and humane. One morning, while exploring a hidden chamber deep beneath the central hall, Ethan discovered a library of data storage devices, crystalline and glowing faintly. The symbols on them were similar to those he had seen throughout the fortress, but more intricate, layered with patterns that suggested knowledge far beyond what any human mind could hold. With careful study, he began to decipher them. They contained maps of star systems, schematics of advanced technology, and histories of the builder's civilization. Most importantly, they contained warnings, lessons learned through centuries of war, betrayal, and exploration. Ethan realized that the fortress was not just a weapon or a home. It was a teacher, offering him knowledge and wisdom that could change humanity's place in the galaxy. And with each lesson, he felt himself becoming not just a guardian of the fortress, but a guardian of human potential. Then, as if summoned by his thoughts, the sky darkened. Fleets appeared on the horizon, larger and more organized than any he had faced before. These were not mindless attackers. They were calculated, disciplined, and well-prepared. They sought the fortress, seeking the power Ethan now held. But this time he did not feel fear. He had learned from the first wave, honed his skills, and strengthened his bond with the fortress. He also understood something he had not before. This battle was not just about defense. It was a statement. Humanity had reached a point in the galaxy where it could be respected, even feared, not because of sheer force, but because of ingenuity, courage, and the willingness to rise above challenges. Ethan moved to the central chamber, placing both hands on the core. Energy surged through him, the fortress responding instantly. Drones took positions, turrets activated, and hidden defenses came alive in a perfectly coordinated symphony. The invaders advanced, but every move they made was anticipated, every weakness countered. Hours passed as the battle unfolded. The fortress moved like a living entity, shifting walls, opening traps, and deploying drones with precision that even the most experienced attackers could not match. Yet Ethan's greatest advantage was not the machines or energy. It was his mind, his ability to think beyond the rules of conventional warfare, and his unbreakable will to protect both the fortress and the potential it represented. At the climax of the battle, A massive enemy ship descended directly over the central chamber. Its weapons locked on the core, threatening to destroy everything. Ethan felt the fortress tremble under the threat, but he did not hesitate. Drawing on the core, he projected a barrier of energy, strong enough to withstand the blasts. At the same time, he redirected energy flows through hidden conduits, creating a counterattack that disabled the ship's systems without harming its crew. The attackers, witnessing the power and precision of the fortress under human control, began to retreat. One by one, their ships lifted off, leaving the stronghold untouched and, more importantly, unshaken. After the battle, silence fell once more. Ethan walked through the halls, inspecting the damage and watching as the fortress returned to its calm state. He had survived not just because of power, but because of intelligence, strategy, and the bond between human courage and alien technology. For the first time, he allowed himself to think about the future. The fortress was no longer just a place to hide. It was a sanctuary, a symbol, and a potential training ground for humanity. If he could teach others what he had learned, how to combine human ingenuity with the gifts of the builders, then humanity could reach heights never before imagined. Ethan looked out across the valley, watching the stars twinkle. He remembered Earth, the crowded colonies, the small ships that had brought him here. He realized that the galaxy was larger, stranger, and more beautiful than anyone had imagined. And humanity had a place in it, a place not given freely but earned through courage, persistence, and intelligence. Over the following weeks, Ethan began preparing the fortress for more than defense. He opened chambers to store supplies, created areas for training, and even designed lessons for future humans who might come to learn. The whispers of the fortress continued, offering guidance, history, and advice. The bond between man and machine grew stronger. Ethan felt no fear of failure. Even if enemies returned, even if challenges came that tested the limits of his strength, he knew that humanity's spirit, combined with the wisdom of the builders, was unstoppable. And then, one evening standing in the central chamber, Ethan finally understood. This fortress, once silent and abandoned, was now a beacon. A symbol of what humans could achieve when courage, intelligence, and persistence met opportunity. And more importantly, it was a message to the galaxy. Humans were not weak. Humans could rise, could endure, and could become something extraordinary. The core pulsed beneath his chest, steady and strong, as though echoing his thoughts. Ethan smiled. He had survived battles, discovered ancient knowledge, and bonded with a power that could have destroyed him. But he had endured. He had risen, and humanity had risen with him. The stars outside seemed brighter that night. The fortress hummed softly, alive and aware. Ethan walked through its halls, no longer a wanderer, no longer alone. He was a keeper, a guardian, and a teacher. And the galaxy would remember his name, not for conquest, but for courage, wisdom, and the enduring spirit of humanity. As the wind whispered across the valleys, Ethan placed a hand on the core and whispered, "This is only the beginning." And for the first time, he felt a true sense of peace.